Don't just watch the drama, be part of it. Hit subscribe now and never miss the next twist.
Friday mornings at Rick and Bank always had a certain rhythm. The smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room, the low murmur of sales calls echoing across the cubicles, the clatter of keyboards trying to meet end-of-week deadlines. For 17 years, Claire Donovan had been part of that rhythm, her quiet presence tucked away in a corner office filled with dusty binders and neatly stacked compliance reports. She was the one who signed the forms nobody else wanted to read, the firewall between reckless executives and ruin. But that Friday, the rhythm broke. The entire staff had been herded into the cafeteria, rows of folding chairs lined up in front of a projector screen. The new COO, Mark Greer, stood at the front like a motivational speaker who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. He wore sneakers with his suit, a rented blazer too tight at the shoulders, and a grin that screamed disruption. "I want to talk about fat," Mark declared, pacing like he'd practiced this in a mirror. "Corporate fat. Dead weight. Legacy costs." His voice carried the easy swagger of a man who'd never missed a paycheck. Behind him, the slide deck flashed buzzwords in oversized fonts: efficiency, agility, growth. Employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Claire sat in the third row, cardigan buttoned neatly, legal pad resting on her lap. She'd seen men like Mark before, consultants parachuting in, drunk on jargon, ready to cut corners they didn't understand. But even she wasn't prepared for what came next. The screen changed again. A red pie chart appeared, labeled non-revenue headcount. One sliver of the pie glowed in neon. Mark tapped it with his clicker. "One compliance role," he said. "One." His grin widened. "Folks, this is insurance paperwork. Email babysitting. We can do better." The room chuckled nervously. Claire felt her chest tighten. He wasn't talking about compliance in general.
He was talking about her.
"As of today," Mark continued, "we're eliminating that position. We've got automated workflows. AI, baby." He winked. A ripple of polite laughter spread, the kind you hear at funerals when someone tells a bad joke to ease the tension. Claire stood up slowly. No applause. No gasps. Just silence. She gathered her things. A coffee mug, a framed photo of her kids, a stack of binders she'd fought to keep updated. 2 interns were already hovering near her desk with cardboard boxes, waiting to pack up the rest.
She didn't argue.
She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She walked toward the exit with the calm of someone who knew storms better than the weathermen. But as she passed Mark, she caught his eye for just a moment. Her look wasn't angry, wasn't pleading. It was colder, sharper, like steel drawn halfway from its sheath. Mark smirked back, dismissing her the way men like him always dismissed women like her, as invisible, replaceable, a line item erased with a keystroke. But deep down, Claire knew something Mark didn't. She wasn't just a line item. She was the lock, the key, and the vault. And by firing her, he had just pulled the pin from a grenade he couldn't see ticking. That night, Claire sat alone in her kitchen. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle of autumn wind against the window. A half-finished cup of coffee sat cooling beside her. On the table lay a stack of folders and a small black USB drive she hadn't touched in years. She plugged it in. The screen lit up with old compliance files, contracts, policy writers, email chains dating back nearly a decade. Most people would have found the sight of endless PDFs unbearable. For Claire, it was like looking at a map only she knew how to read. She opened one file at random. Umbrella Liability Policy, 2019 renewal. She remembered the night she rewrote that rider, staying in the office until 2:40 a.m. after a product mislabeling scandal nearly triggered a lawsuit. Legal had been too slow. Finance too arrogant. She'd saved the company by renegotiating with the carrier directly, embedding new protections, and burying the details in procedural clauses no executive ever bothered to skim. Scrolling down, her eyes caught on something. Page 7. Paragraph 6. A line she'd written herself. Annual renewal of umbrella liability coverage must be executed in writing by the designated registered agent. RA's signature must be physically archived per Carrier Clause 14.6. No exceptions. Her name stared back at her from the signature line. Claire M. Donovan, registered agent. She froze. This wasn't just any clause. It wasn't boilerplate. It was a choke point, one she had intentionally designed after the 2018 scare. Automated renewals didn't count. Proxy signatures didn't count. The system was hard-coded to require her authorization once a year, every October 14th, before noon Eastern. She checked the date. October 13th, Friday. Her breath caught. The policy would expire in less than 72 hours, by noon on Monday. Without her wet signature, the bank's entire liability coverage would lapse. Every vendor contract, every employee healthcare plan, every cyber liability agreement, they would all freeze instantly. Mark hadn't just fired her. He had amputated the one hand holding the parachute. Claire leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. 17 years of being ignored, brushed aside, laughed at in meetings. They had treated her like furniture, like a cost center. But the truth was simple, devastating, and already written in black ink. Without her, Ricken Bank couldn't legally function. She closed the laptop, sipped the now-cold coffee, and smiled faintly. Not out of malice. Out of clarity. They thought they'd erased her. But by firing her, they had written her name in fire across the company's survival. By the time Claire returned to the office that evening, the building was empty. Desks sat abandoned, screensavers flickering across glowing monitors. In the distance, the janitor's cart squeaked across the tiled floor. She walked to her office one last time. Her badge was already deactivated, but she knew the back stairwell still opened if you pushed hard enough. She slipped inside, collected a few files she'd hidden in the bottom drawer, and sat for a moment in the quiet. On her monitor, the compliance dashboard blinked. A red banner had already appeared. Renewal pending. Registered agent signature required. The countdown had started. Claire typed a few commands, disabling proxy accounts she'd set up years ago for emergencies. It wasn't sabotage, it was procedure. The policy required manual authorization, and she was the only authorized agent. She made sure the system knew it. At exactly 6:06 p.m., she logged out, locking the gate behind her. Upstairs, Mark and the leadership team were drinking champagne in the executive lounge, celebrating the successful restructuring. Laughter echoed through the glass walls. They toasted to savings, agility, growth. Not one of them had checked the dashboard. By the time Claire slipped out the side door into the cool October night, the die had been cast. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vindictive. She was simply gone. And by Monday morning, when vendors began demanding updated certificates, when payroll froze, when systems crashed, they would finally understand what she had always known. The quietest person in the room had been the only thing keeping the walls from collapsing. Monday mornings at Ricken Dynamics usually started with caffeine and chaos, but this one was different. The chaos wasn't the usual scramble of missed deadlines and sales targets. It was quieter, heavier, like a storm cloud rolling in, pressing down on everyone's lungs. At 9:17 a.m., Barry from Legal got the first email. Subject line: pending MSA execution contingent on updated CLI. The vendor was Pollock Data Systems, a multi-million-dollar partner. The email was short, surgical. We cannot proceed until your insurance certificate is renewed. Please confirm coverage immediately. Barry frowned, rubbed his temples, and forwarded it to the CFO. At 9:22, a second email landed. Then a third. By 9:30, his inbox was stacked with red flag notices from 3 different vendors. By 9:37, AWS support had issued a service alert. Sandbox access suspended pending certificate renewal. By 9:45, HR pinged him in all caps. New hire benefits portal locked. Employee listed AS uncovered. Barry picked up the phone, dialed the COO. Mark Greer answered on the second ring, sounding distracted, his voice echoing like he was pacing the glass hallways upstairs. "What's up, Barry?" Barry's voice was clipped. "We've got a problem. Coverage lapsed Friday. Policy expired. Vendors are flagging it. AWS is suspending access. Even HR can't process benefits." On the other end, silence for a beat. Then Mark laughed, a short bark that sounded more defensive than amused. That can't be right. These things auto-renew. It's 2023, Barry. Nobody uses paper signatures anymore. Barry's jaw tightened. We do. Clause 14.6. Manual renewal. Wet signature. Registered agent only. And who's the registered agent? Barry closed his eyes. Claire Donovan. The line went dead for a second. Barry thought the call had dropped, but then Mark's voice came back, sharper. Claire? The one we cut? Yes. You're telling me the woman we fired on Friday is the only one who can sign our insurance renewal? That's exactly what I'm telling you. At 10:02 a.m., the finance department froze outbound vendor payments. Treasury flagged wire transfers with a big red banner. Insurance validation expired. Sales teams started fielding calls from panicked clients asking why contracts were suddenly marked non-compliant. One unlucky HR rep had to explain to a new hire that her healthcare plan was inactive 3 days before her scheduled surgery. By 10:15, whispers filled the office floor. Something's wrong with compliance. Didn't we fire that lady on Friday? My JIRA ticket just bounced. It says blocked pending policy confirmation. The jokes started next. Guess AI didn't sign the forms. Nervous laughter. Nobody was really laughing. Upstairs, in the 10th floor boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. Mark Greer was pacing with the same restless energy he'd shown during his town hall speech, but this time there was no swagger, just sweat. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor with every turn. Barry sat hunched over a thick binder of insurance clauses, the one Claire had fought to rewrite after the 2018 debacle. His glasses slid down his nose as he flipped to the flagged section again, pointing with a trembling finger. Clause 14.6, he repeated for the 5th time. Annual renewal must be executed in writing by the designated registered agent. No proxies. No digital automation. No executive overrides. One person only. And that person is Claire. Mark slammed his hand on the table. There's got to be a workaround. Add someone else. Put my name in. I'm the COO. Who's going to question me? Barry shook his head slowly. The insurance carrier. And every vendor with compliance protocols. It's binding. We can't just scribble a name and hope nobody notices. This isn't a parking ticket. This is liability coverage for our entire operation. The CFO, pale and sweating, chimed in. We've got tens of millions in contracts dependent on this coverage. If it's invalid, our Series C filings could be non-compliant. Investors will pull out. Mark scoffed, trying to mask his rising panic. So we call her. Offer her a bonus. A Starbucks card, whatever. Just get her in here. Barry's lips thinned. We tried. Called her cell. Sent a courier to her house. No answer. Try harder, Mark snapped. Barry slammed the binder shut. We can't make her sign. And why would she? We humiliated her in front of the entire company 2 days ago. The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector, still glowing with the error message from the compliance dashboard. Renewal pending. Registered agent authorization required. Deadline, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At 10:31 a.m., the Slack channels went from quiet whispers to outright panic. Screenshots of the red banner spread like wildfire. Someone posted a GIF of a dumpster fire. Someone else wrote, Jennifer was the lid. The message racked up laughing emojis, then crying emojis, then silence. By 10:45, the COO was on the phone with the board chair. His voice, normally smooth and confident, cracked with every sentence. It's just a hiccup. She'll come around. We're handling it. But nobody in the room believed him anymore. At 10:59, AWS followed through. Development environments went dark. 3 product teams froze mid-sprint. A scheduled demo for investors blinked out like someone had pulled the plug. At 11:04, the VP of People stormed into the boardroom, face red. We've got employees uncovered. If anyone files a claim today, anything, a car accident, an ER visit, we're personally liable. This isn't just contracts. It's lives. Mark tried to wave her off. Legal will handle it. Barry's voice cut through, flat and final. Legal can't handle it. Claire was the legal. She is the override. Without her, we're not just exposed, we're naked. The boardroom went still, the kind of stillness that only comes when people realize the iceberg isn't ahead, it's already ripped the hull. At 11:11, the audit chair dialed in from New York, voice clipped and furious. Who authorized firing the registered agent during an active policy cycle? Mark swallowed hard. Nobody spoke. The truth settled over them like smoke after an explosion. They hadn't just fired a woman in a cardigan with dusty binders. They'd fired the only person who could keep the entire structure from crumbling. By 11:30 a.m., the company wasn't functioning. Payroll was frozen. Vendor payments halted. Cloud systems locked. Contracts suspended. Every single artery of the business clogged at once. And somewhere in a cabin by a lake, 3 hours outside the city, Claire Donovan sat on a porch with a paperback novel, phone powered off, sipping coffee as the October wind carried leaves across the water.
She wasn't sabotaging them.
She wasn't plotting revenge. She was simply gone. And in her absence, the silence was deafening. By noon on Monday, Rickon Dynamics wasn't a company anymore. It was a house of cards quivering in an air-conditioned boardroom, and everyone knew the collapse would come with the next breeze. Claire Donovan was no longer just a name on an old compliance binder. She was the only name that mattered. And she was gone. 11:45 a.m., the first crack. The boardroom had become a war bunker. Coffee cups ringed the table like empty shell casings. Executives whispered into phones, sending frantic Slack pings, anything that might disguise the truth. No one had control. The COO, Mark Greer, barked into his headset. Find her.
I don't care how.
HR, legal, even IT, track her badge, her login, her goddamn Netflix account if you have to. The IT lead shifted uncomfortably. We, can't. Mark glared. Can't? Or won't? She disabled her token the day she was terminated. Wiped her recovery credentials, shut off auto-forwarding. There's no digital trail. For a man who built his career on buzzwords like agility and visibility, the irony was brutal. Claire had made herself invisible. 11:59 a.m., deadline. Barry from legal stared at the blinking banner on the compliance dashboard. The clock hit noon. Policy renewal expired. Status lapsed. The room exhaled all at once, like a balloon finally popped. That's it, Barry said flatly. We are uninsured. The words landed like a body hitting the floor. No one spoke. No one moved. And then the phone started ringing. 12:15 p.m. Damage control. By early afternoon, the cracks were earthquakes. A $4.8 million vendor rollout paused midstream. Payroll suspended. AWS sandbox locked. An employee scheduled for surgery now listed as uncovered. The board chair's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. We need her back. Now. Mark slammed his palm on the table. She won't come back.
She's bitter.
She'll make us beg. Barry shook his head. She's not bitter. She's meticulous. If she wanted revenge, she'd still be here to watch us burn. No, she's just gone. And that makes her more dangerous. 1:03 p.m. The search party. They tried everything. HR pulled up her file. Address, emergency contacts, next of kin. The address was an apartment downtown, but a courier had already knocked 3 times that morning. No answer. Emergency contact? A P.O. box registered to a trust. No phone, no name, just a number. Her Slack account? Deactivated months ago. She'd removed herself from every group chat. Too much noise, she'd told a coworker once. I work better without it. Her LinkedIn? Dormant. Last update 3 years ago. Her personal phone? Straight to voicemail. She wasn't hiding. She'd simply opted out. 2:14 p.m. Desperation. In the cafeteria, employees whispered in corners. Did she really lock them out? I heard she had a kill switch. My manager said Claire basically was the insurance. Someone posted a meme in the company Slack. A dumpster fire labeled operations. with a caption. Claire was the lid. Executives saw it. No one laughed. Meanwhile, the COO was unraveling. His blazer was off, shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat blooming under his arms. He paced the boardroom like a trapped wolf. She's not some mastermind. She's a paper pusher, Mark snarled. Offer her money.
Equity.
Hell, offer her my office. Everyone has a price. Barry leaned forward, his voice a low growl.
No, Mark.
That's your mistake.
You thought she was cheap.
Disposable. You never realized she was the parachute. 3:07 p.m., the trail. Finally, a break. An intern from IT, Trina, 23, nervous, raised her hand. I might know something. Every head turned. I once helped her set up her VPN. She mentioned she spends weekends at a cabin upstate. Said it's the only place with no cell service. She laughed about it, said she liked to watch the wind instead of emails. Mark's eyes lit up. Where? Trina shook her head. She never said exactly. Just lakefront. Somewhere 3 hours north. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. 3:30 p.m., the hunt. By mid-afternoon, the search turned literal. HR hired a private investigator. The COO dispatched his assistant to drive north with nothing but Google Maps and blind faith. The CFO even suggested contacting her ex-husband, only to be reminded that the divorce filings listed her as sole custodian of all personal and professional records. It was like chasing smoke. Every lead evaporated the moment they reached for it. 4:45 p.m., the breaking point. By late afternoon, the building felt hollow. Emails went unanswered. Systems blinked error messages. Department stalled, frozen in place like deer on an empty highway. In the boardroom, tension snapped. She can't just walk away, Mark shouted. She owes this company. She doesn't owe you a damn thing. Barry cut him off. His voice was louder now, shaking with anger. You fired her. You called her dead weight. And now you want her to save you? She doesn't owe you. You owe her. The silence afterward was suffocating. 5:12 p.m., the call. Finally, a phone buzzed. Not Mark's. Not Barry's. Laura Benton, the audit chair, glanced down at her personal cell. Caller ID, blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. For a long moment, nothing but static. Then a calm, steady voice. I have conditions. It was Claire. The room froze. Mark leaned forward, practically salivating. Put her on speaker. Laura shook her head, turned away. Go on. No cameras. No apologies. No Mark. Claire's voice was like ice. If they want me back, they send the board resolution signed by 12 o'clock tomorrow. Otherwise, let them explain to their investors why they're uninsured. The line clicked dead. Laura turned back to the room. Her voice was steady, almost reverent. She's coming. But not for us. For survival. And Mark, she locked eyes with the COO. She doesn't want you in the room. Epilogue of Part 5. By the time the sun set, Rickon Dynamics was no longer hunting Claire. Claire was hunting them. The company's survival rested in the hands of the one woman they thought was replaceable. And tomorrow, she'd make them pay the price of underestimating her. The boardroom at Rickon Dynamics was a mausoleum that evening. Phones muted, laptops closed, executives sitting stiff-backed in their chairs as if waiting for judgment. For hours they had begged, spun, rationalized, but in the end, one voice cut through all of it. Claire Donovan's. She wasn't in the building, but she might as well have been sitting at the head of the table. Her words still hung in the air. I have conditions. 6:30 p.m., the fallout. Laura Benton set her phone face down on the table. The rest of the board leaned forward, desperate. What did she say exactly? The CFO asked, his voice too thin. Laura repeated it slowly. No cameras. No apologies. No Mark. Board resolution signed by noon tomorrow. Mark Greer shot out of his chair, face flushed. She can't dictate terms to us. She's a mid-level compliance officer. Barry from legal corrected him, with deliberate calm. She was the compliance officer. And thanks to you, she's now the only one who can pull us out of this mess. Mark sneered. We're not giving her the satisfaction. We'll find a workaround. Barry flipped the binder shut with a thump. There is no workaround. She built the system this way on purpose. And you signed off on it when you on board.
Check your packet.
Mark's jaw flexed, but his silence was an admission. 7:15 p.m. The whispered war. While the board argued, the company bled. Vendors sent breach of contract warnings. Payroll flagged noncompliance with federal obligations. Even internal benefits portals displayed blunt red warnings. No active coverage on file. Employees whispered in corners. Rumors churned through Slack like wildfire. Some called her a hero. Others called her a saboteur. But everyone agreed on one thing. Claire Donovan was the only name that mattered. And she knew it. 8:03 p.m. Negotiation behind closed doors. Laura stepped out of the boardroom. Phone pressed to her ear. She dialed the number that had appeared earlier, a blocked ID routed through some encrypted service. It rang twice. Then Claire's voice, calm and steady. Go ahead. Claire, it's Laura Benton. Audit chair. Silence. Laura continued, careful with her words. We heard your conditions. I'm prepared to listen. But the others? She glanced back at the frosted boardroom doors where shadows argued. They're resistant. Claire cut her off. That's their problem. If they want me to sign, they'll meet my terms. No debate. No delay. By noon tomorrow. Laura lowered her voice. What are the terms? You'll see them in writing. A pause. One more thing. Mark Greer is not in the room when I return. If he is, I walk. And I don't come back. Laura hesitated. That may be difficult. Not my problem. You decide what's more difficult, benching one arrogant COO or watching your company unravel uninsured.
Click.
The call ended. 9:30 p.m. The list. When the courier envelope arrived the next morning, it was thick cream paper folded neatly in thirds. No letterhead, no flourish, just the title scrawled in bold black ink. Terms of reinstatement, C. Donovan. There were 6 bullet points. Immediate reinstatement. Retroactive compensation for breach of contract, including full bonus prorated to termination date. Title adjustment. VP of Risk Governance. No direct manager. Board-only reporting line. Triple current base salary. Written apology optional. Full compliance restoration non-negotiable. At the bottom, her signature. Claire Donovan. 10:12 a.m. The divide. The boardroom erupted. This is extortion, one director snapped. She's holding us hostage, another muttered. But Laura Benton silenced them with a raised hand. She's holding us accountable, Laura said flatly. She built the parachute. We cut her loose. Now she's asking us to pay the price. Mark slammed his hand on the table. You can't be serious. Give her triple salary? A VP title? She's bluffing. Barry leaned forward. If she's bluffing, then sign the renewal yourself. Mark's mouth opened, then shut again. 11:05 a.m. Pressure mounts. The clock was merciless. Vendor portals locked. Payroll suspended for the second straight day. AWS issued a hard suspend notice. Service termination in 24 hours. Even the board members' personal phones buzzed with angry calls from investors. At 11:17, Sheila Alvarez, the audit chair dialing in from New York, snapped. You want to play games, Mark? Play them on your own time. This isn't strategy. This is survival. Mark's face turned a mottled red. 11:40 a.m. The decision. Laura laid Claire's terms flat on the table. The room fell silent. This is the choice, Laura said. Sign or sink. Barry added the final nail. And for the record, firing her was not just reckless. It may expose us personally under D&O liability. If we reject her terms and collapse, we'll be explaining this to federal auditors. The directors shifted in their seats. The weight of the decision pressed like a physical force. At 11:52 a.m., Sheila's voice crackled through the speaker. Call the vote. Hands went up, one by one. All except Mark's. The ayes have it, Laura declared. Claire's terms are accepted. 11:58 a.m. Mark's fall. Mark's voice cut through the room, desperate now. You'll regret this. You can't just hand her power. She's dangerous. Laura's gaze was ice.
No, Mark.
You're dangerous. She saved us in 2018. She warned us about automation. And you dismissed her as a cost center. Now she's the only reason we're still breathing. The door opened. Two men in dark suits entered quietly. One placed a sealed folder in front of Mark. Termination paperwork. He sputtered, but the board ignored him. His reign was over. 12 p.m. the shift. The deadline ticked closer. The boardroom waited in heavy silence until the door opened again, not with a bang, but with the quiet authority of inevitability. Claire Donovan walked in. Same tan cardigan. Same black flats. No makeup. No theatrics. Just a folder tucked neatly under her arm. She placed her conditions on the table, folded once, and looked directly at Laura. Do we have a deal? Laura nodded. We do. Barry slid a pen across the table. Claire picked it up, uncapped it, and paused. You fire me in public, she said softly. Now you reinstate me in private. That's fine. I don't need applause. I don't need apologies. I just need this company to remember that survival doesn't come from speeches. She signed her name with steady strokes. The renewal was filed. The carrier confirmed. Systems began to light back up across the building. Slack messages turned from panic to cautious relief. The artery was unblocked. Claire set the pen down, looked around the table once, and stood. I don't want your trust, she said. I want your silence. Remember that the next time you call me a cost center. And then she walked out. Epilogue of Part 6. The board sat stunned. Mark's chair was empty. Claire's name was inked on the renewal. The woman they fired on Friday now held the company in the palm of her hand. And she wasn't done yet. The official announcement never came. No company-wide email, no triumphant Slack blast. But by Tuesday morning, everyone at Rickon Dynamics knew. Claire Donovan was back. Not as the quiet compliance officer they'd ignored for years, but as VP of Risk Governance, a title no one had ever heard of, reporting only to the board. Her return was a whisper first, passed in hushed tones near the coffee machine. Then it became a fact stamped across systems. Her credentials lit green again. Her badge pinged the elevators. Her name appeared on org charts at the very top of a newly created division. She had been erased on Friday. By Tuesday, she was untouchable. 9 a.m., the new office. Claire didn't move back into her old cubicle fortress of binders and locked drawers. Facilities had prepared a new office for her 2 floors up, a corner suite with glass walls and a skyline view. The desk was sleek, uncluttered. No stress ball from the 2016 Compliance Summit. No regret nothing mug. Just her laptop, a leather folio, and a single notebook with her initials embossed. Employees walking past slowed their steps, stealing glances. Some smiled faintly, as if proud. Others kept their heads down, afraid. But all of them understood. Something had shifted. The woman they thought was disposable had returned with gravity in her wake. 10:15 a.m., Mark's absence. Downstairs, Mark Greer's office was dark. His nameplate had been stripped from the door. Rumors churned. Some said he'd resigned. Others whispered the board had forced him out. A few joked he was last seen pacing the parking lot like a man searching for his reflection. But Claire didn't waste a thought on him. Mark was finished. His exit papers were signed before she'd even picked up her pen. He had called her a cost center. Now he was a cautionary tale. 11 a.m., the first meeting. Claire's first official act as VP wasn't to rally the troops or give a fiery speech. She called a meeting with Barry from Legal and Laura Benton, the audit chair. Her voice was measured. We're not patching leaks anymore. We're rebuilding the hull. Barry raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning we stop letting flashy executives gamble with compliance. From today, risk governance is a board function. No exceptions. Laura leaned back, impressed. You'll have resistance. Claire's lips tightened, but her eyes were steady. They resisted Friday. They paid for it Monday. They won't forget. 12:30 p.m., the ripples. By lunch, the ripple effects had reached every corner of the company. HR sent an update. New reporting structure. Risk governance now bypasses COO. Finance flagged her as sole approver for vendor insurance clauses. IT restored her encrypted vaults with 3 terabytes of data only she could access. Whispers spread. She'd locked the company into her own system, a digital fortress. And then came the Slack message that sealed the legend. From Claire Donovan. All compliance reviews will be centralized under risk governance effective immediately. Departments, please prepare your files. We're not going back to AI checkboxes. We're going back to accountability. 2 p.m., the pushback. Not everyone was pleased. Kyle from sales, still jittery from caffeine, muttered to his team, "She's gonna strangle deals with red tape." A DevOps manager grumbled, "We'll never hit deadlines if she audits every policy." But their complaints carried no weight. Claire had leverage now. Real leverage. And for the first time, accountability had teeth. 3:15 p.m., the confrontation. It happened in the hallway. A junior director from operations, emboldened by frustration, stopped her as she passed. "With respect, Claire, this isn't sustainable. You can't just seize control overnight. You're bottlenecking us." Claire regarded him coolly, her tone even. "I didn't seize control. It was abandoned. I just picked it up." He stammered. We need flexibility." She leaned closer, her words precise. "Flexibility doesn't save you when a vendor lawsuit wipes out your budget. Flexibility doesn't protect an employee when their surgery isn't covered. Compliance isn't the bottleneck. It's the airbag. You don't complain about airbags until you need one." The director flushed red. He didn't argue again. 4 p.m., the board call. That afternoon, Claire joined her first board call as VP. Her presence was calm, unhurried. She laid out her plan in 3 points. Centralize risk governance. All insurance, vendor compliance, and liability reviews flow through her office. Audit historical policies. Revisit every contract from the last 5 years, starting with Mark's initiatives. Negotiate future terms, no more. Auto-renew complacency. Every renewal signed in writing, reviewed annually. One director asked, "What about optics? Won't this slow growth?" Claire didn't flinch. "Optics don't pay settlements. Growth doesn't matter if you bleed out in arbitration. We almost did, twice. I won't let it happen again." Silence. Then Sheila Alvarez's voice crackled through from New York. "You've got our backing." 5:30 p.m., the shift in power. By evening, the hierarchy at Rickon Dynamics looked different. Claire hadn't just been reinstated. She'd rewritten the org chart. She was now a direct line to the board, immune from middle management, untouchable by COOs with rented blazers and protein shakes. Employees who once overlooked her now avoided her gaze out of respect. Some, quietly, out of fear. And Claire? She didn't bask in it. She didn't celebrate. She simply sat at her desk, documented the day, and locked her notebook drawer with a soft click. 6 p.m., a private moment. When the office thinned out, Barry stopped by her door. "You know," he said, "you could have burned them, left them uninsured, let the whole thing collapse." Claire looked up from her notes. And then what? 1,000 people out of work? Vendors ruined? Employees without healthcare? "I don't punish the innocent for management's arrogance." Barry studied her for a moment. "Still, you could have walked away." Claire's eyes softened, but her voice was steady. "I did walk away. They pulled me back. And now they'll learn what that costs." Epilogue of Part 7. As night fell, the city's skyline glittered beyond her glass office. Claire leaned back, letting the hum of restored servers and relieved employees drift through the floor. She wasn't the ghost in the cubicle anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was the firewall. And this time, she was fireproof. The first shockwave came at 8:42 a.m. on Wednesday. Claire's inbox pinged with a flagged attachment from the audit team she'd deputized overnight. The subject line was simple, urgent. Vendor liability gap. She opened it, and the numbers hit her like a slap. 4 contracts, each worth millions, had been renewed under Mark's growth-first philosophy. None of them contained the updated indemnity clauses Claire herself had written 3 years earlier. It meant the bank was sitting exposed. If a vendor defaulted or a product failure hit the news, Rick and Dynamics would be personally liable. Jesus, Claire muttered. She pushed her chair back and stood, notebook in hand. This wasn't negligence. This was malpractice. 9:15 a.m., the war room. She summoned legal, finance, and IT into the old compliance conference room. The walls were lined with faded charts from pre-COVID days, but today, the space felt electric. Barry was there, eyes already shadowed from lack of sleep. Kyle from sales stumbled in late, coffee in one hand, excuses in the other. Trina, the junior analyst who once couldn't even log into the portal, sat nervously in the corner, notebook trembling in her lap. Claire wasted no time. She slapped the audit report onto the table. These contracts, renewed without coverage. Who authorized them? Kyle shifted in his chair. Look, Mark wanted speed. The vendors were pressuring us. We couldn't wait on compliance red tape. Claire's stare cut through him. You didn't wait. You gambled. And now the house is holding the bill. Barry leaned forward. This isn't just sloppy. If a claim hits, we're exposed on 4 fronts. Employment liability, data security, international shipping, even healthcare vendors. The room went silent. Every department had a stake in the disaster. 10 a.m., the board alarm. By mid-morning, word had reached the board. Sheila Alvarez's voice crackled over the line again. Claire, quantify the risk. Claire stood in the center of the war room, steady, precise. If we're sued, we could face exposure in the range of 50 to 70 million. That's not projection. That's precedent. There was a pause so heavy it felt like static. Then Sheila's clipped reply. Dig deeper. Find every weakness. Assume nothing. Claire nodded. She already planned to. 11:30 a.m., the paper trail. She retreated to her office, shutting the door against the noise. On her desk, she laid out 3 external drives, each labeled in her block handwriting, active,
Archive.
contingency. One by one, she pulled up contracts, cross-referenced insurance riders, and traced signature trails. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Mark had cut corners for over a year. He'd pushed renewals without cross-checking policy updates, bragging to the board about agility, while hollowing out the company's shield brick by brick. He wasn't the only one. Several department heads had gone along, signing off without question, too busy chasing quarterly bonuses to care about long-term safety. Claire's pen scratched across her notebook. Every date, every omission, every red flag. This wasn't cleanup. This was excavation. And every layer revealed rot. 1 p.m., the Whisper Network. Word spread fast. Employees in sales, HR, and IT started whispering in kitchen corners and Slack threads. Did you hear Claire found something? Something big. Bigger than the insurance lapse. Way bigger. By lunch, people weren't just gossiping. They were scared. Vendors had already begun sending formal notices, asking for confirmation of active coverage. For the first time in years, the chatter didn't circle around bonuses or product launches. It circled around Claire Donovan. The woman who'd once been invisible now had the company's future clutched in her binder. 2:30 p.m., the face-off. It was Kyle who snapped first. He stormed into her office without knocking, face flushed. You're blowing this out of proportion. These contracts work fine. Vendors just need reassurance. Stop acting like the sky is falling. Claire didn't even look up from her desk. The sky's not falling. You tore holes in the parachute. He bristled. I answer to revenue, not you. Now she looked up, eyes like steel. You answer to liability. You just didn't know it until now. Consider this your education. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. The power balance had shifted. He could feel it in his bones. 3:15 p.m., the second shockwave. The next audit file landed in her inbox, and this one was worse. A cybersecurity vendor agreement, renewed last spring, contained a loophole that voided data breach coverage above 10 million. In an age of ransomware and leaks, that was catastrophic. Claire's stomach tightened. If one breach hit, Rickon wouldn't just bleed money, it could collapse. She stood, walked to the boardroom, and dropped the file on the polished wood table with a single sentence. If we don't act now, this company is already dead. The directors stared at her, wide-eyed. They'd hired her back for insurance. They hadn't realized she'd become their only shield against collapse. 5 p.m., the choice. By evening, the board was split. Some wanted to quietly patch the contracts, hide the gaps, and move forward. Others, led by Sheila, demanded transparency and overhaul. Claire stood firm. You can bury this, but it will surface. Vendors aren't stupid. Regulators aren't blind. You want growth? Then own the mistakes. Clean house. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Authority clung to her like armor. One by one, the directors leaned her way. 6:45 p.m., alone in the office. When the building finally emptied, Claire sat alone in her glass-walled office, city lights flickering outside. She thought about Friday, her quiet walkout with nothing but a contingency drive and a half-used pack of pens. She thought about Monday, vendors freezing contracts, panic sweeping the halls. And now Wednesday, the day the reckoning began. She wasn't vindictive. She wasn't even triumphant. She was steady. She was the firewall. And tomorrow, the firestorm would start. Epilogue of Part 8. In a private note to herself, she wrote, "Reckoning isn't revenge. It's recognition. The company will either learn or burn. And I will not be silent again." She closed the notebook, slid it into her drawer, and turned off the light. The war was no longer about her survival. It was about theirs. The storm broke before sunrise. At 6:13 a.m., Claire's phone buzzed with an encrypted alert from finance. Vendor payments suspended. CMI validation failure. By 6:45, she was on her second cup of black coffee, staring at a dashboard bleeding red warnings. Not one vendor. Not two. 12. 12 critical partners had locked the bank out of systems and shipments, citing expired insurance coverage and unresolved liability clauses. This wasn't a paper cut anymore. This was hemorrhage. 7:30 a.m., the flood. By the time employees trickled into the office, the flood had begun. Slack channels lit up. AWS sandbox suspended. We can't deploy code. Healthcare partner froze claims processing. Payroll vendor says they need active CLI by noon or they halt disbursement. In every department, the same question echoed. What the hell is happening? No one had answers. Only Claire did. And she was preparing to deliver them. 8:15 a.m., the emergency gathering. The boardroom filled faster than it had since the insurance lapse days earlier. Executives, directors, team leads. Everyone wanted clarity. Claire stood at the head of the table. Notebook open, eyes calm. She didn't sugarcoat. We're functionally paralyzed. 12 vendors have suspended services. More are threatening. This isn't a warning. This is operational shutdown. Gasps rippled around the table. Kyle from sales muttered something about temporary glitches, but Barry shut him down with a glare. Claire continued, her tone razor-sharp. These gaps aren't accidents. They're the product of negligence, corner-cutting, and arrogance. We've been living on borrowed time. And today, the loan came due. 9 a.m., the denial. Predictably, resistance rose. A marketing VP blurted out, "Vendors overreact. We'll smooth it over." Claire flipped to a page in her notebook and read aloud. Clause 7, coverage verification required for continued access to infrastructure. That's not overreaction. That's law. We are uninsured. And until I sign new policies, nothing moves. Silence. Mark Greer would have filled the silence with bluster. But Mark was gone. And now the emptiness was deafening. 10:20 a.m., the vendor ultimatums. By mid-morning, Barry's inbox pinged with ultimatums. Pollock Data Systems. Renew insurance by end of day or contract breach triggered. Value, $4.8 million. Helix Healthcare. Claims halted pending CY update. Affected 2,300 employees. AWS Enterprise. Coverage verification required within 2 hours. Soft suspend initiated. Barry slid the printouts across the table like obituaries. This, he said quietly, is what collapse looks like. 11 a.m., the breaking point. In HR, panic spread. Employees couldn't access their benefits portals. One woman broke down in tears after discovering her surgery, scheduled in 48 hours, wouldn't be covered if the lapse continued. In IT, engineers watched helplessly as servers blinked offline. Without active vendor coverage, cloud access was shrinking by the minute. In sales, deals slipped into freefall. Clients demanded proof of coverage before signing renewals. Kyle paced his office, sweating through his shirt, muttering about pipeline death. And through it all, Claire remained calm. She walked the floor, silent but present, her notebook tucked under her arm like a shield.
People stepped aside when she passed.
Some nodded, almost in gratitude. Others avoided her eyes, ashamed they'd once dismissed her as invisible. 11:45 a.m., the whisper. In the boardroom, the directors whispered amongst themselves. This could sink us. Who knew about these gaps? Mark signed off on most of them, and we let him. Sheila Alvarez's voice cut through the noise on speakerphone. Enough. We don't need scapegoats. We need solutions. Claire? All eyes turned. She didn't look rattled. She looked resolved. We can stabilize, but not with patchwork. We need full renegotiation of liability clauses, fresh coverage, and restructured vendor contracts. And I'll need absolute authority to do it. The room froze. Absolute authority. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. 12:15 p.m., the collapse looms. Time bled toward noon, and the company's pulse grew faint. Payroll queued but frozen. Vendor systems blinked offline. Client renewals evaporated. By 12:30, Claire knew they had reached the knife's edge. Another hour, and the damage would be irreversible. 1 p.m., the clash. Kyle cornered her in the hallway, voice raised. You're using this crisis to grab power. You're holding us hostage. Claire stopped, turned, and looked at him with a calm that chilled the air. I didn't create this crisis. You did every time you looked the other way. Every time you signed without reading. Every time you laughed at compliance. This isn't leverage. This is consequence. He sputtered, red-faced, but she walked past him, unshaken. 2 p.m., the final straw. The call came from AWS.
Direct.
Blunt. Without proof of coverage by 5 p.m., your enterprise access will be terminated. All environments. All data. The words hung like a death sentence. Termination. Not suspension. Termination. Barry repeated the message to the board, voice hollow. If we lose AWS, we lose everything. Everyone turned to Claire. Her voice was low but unflinching. Then we don't lose it. But you'll give me what I need. Now. 3:30 p.m., the turning silence. The directors sat in silence, weighing her demand. If they gave her full control, she could rebuild the company's shield, but she would answer to no one but them. If they refused, the company would bleed out by sundown. Finally, Sheila's voice broke the stillness. Draft the resolution. Give her the authority. Now. Claire didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded, opened her notebook, and began writing. Epilogue of Part 9. Outside, the office buzzed with panic. Vendors demanded answers, employees whispered about collapse, and systems blinked red. Inside the boardroom, Claire wrote calmly, steadily, her pen moving across the page like a scalpel. This wasn't just a reckoning anymore. This was survival. And she was the only one who knew how to win. The resolution came down like a gavel. At 3:42 p.m., the board formally transferred authority over all compliance and vendor renegotiations to Claire Donovan. Her new title wasn't ceremonial, it was a weapon. Acting Chief Risk Officer, reporting only to the board. The signatures weren't dry before Barry leaned across the table and muttered, God help us. Claire didn't look at him. She was already dialing. 4 p.m., the vendor gauntlet. The first call went to Pollock Data Systems, the $4.8 million vendor who had already frozen rollout. Their rep, a sharp woman named Amelia Cho, came on video, jaw tight. "Claire, your coverage is expired. Our contract clearly states." Claire raised a hand. "I know what it states. I also know Pollock doesn't want to walk away from a multi-million-dollar client in Q4. Amelia's eyes narrowed. "Without a certificate of insurance, we can't deliver. Full stop." Claire leaned closer. "You will deliver, because I'll sign a temporary indemnity rider today. It gives you coverage on all live projects until renewal is filed. And in exchange, you roll back the 10% penalty clause you snuck into the last MSA draft." The silence was thick. Amelia finally exhaled. "You read that far?" "Twice," Claire said flatly. By the time the call ended, Pollock had lifted the freeze. 4:37 p.m., the healthcare minefield. Next came Helix Healthcare, the partner covering 2,300 employees. Their rep was less patient. "Claire, people have scheduled surgeries. Claims are suspended. You're exposing your staff to catastrophic risk." She nodded once. "That's why I'm not asking. I'm offering. I'll backdate every claim this week once the policy renews. But you extend our window by 72 hours. Grace period, written in email, signed tonight." "That's not standard procedure," the rep snapped. Claire didn't blink. "Neither is letting employees die on operating tables. Choose." At 4:50, Helix caved. Grace period extended. 5 p.m., the AWS soared. Then came the worst. AWS Enterprise. A voice crackled through the line, clipped and cold. "This is Jason from AWS Risk Compliance. Without proof of renewal by 5 o'clock, your enterprise access terminates. Permanently." Claire's pen tapped once on her notebook. "Jason, you've read our logs. You know our policy lapsed by hours, not months. Killing our access over a timing gap serves no one." Jason didn't flinch. "Rules are rules." She leaned forward, her voice ablaze. "Then here's a new rule. If you terminate, I'll file a Clause 14 dispute under federal procurement law. That means dragging AWS into arbitration with the SEC. Do you want regulators reading every line of your enterprise agreements?" Silence. Long, heavy. Finally, Jason sighed. "You have until midnight. No later." Claire smiled faintly. "That's all I need." 5:45 p.m., the fallout. Back in the boardroom, the directors sat stunned as Claire rattled off outcomes. Pollock unfroze contracts. Helix extended claims coverage. AWS granted a midnight extension. Barry whispered, "She just bought us 3 days of life in 3 phone calls." Kyle from sales scoffed, but it sounded hollow. He knew she'd done what none of them could. 6 p.m., the counterattack. But the real fight was just starting. Mark Greer, ex-COO, recently humiliated, wasn't gone quietly. He'd already leaked whispers to his network, painting Claire as a rogue compliance officer who'd hijacked control. By evening, rumors swirled across LinkedIn and Slack groups. A director read one aloud. "Bank operations hijacked by mid-level risk officer." Investors spooked. The boardroom bristled. Claire didn't. "Let him talk," she said. "By morning, the only story that matters will be the one with signatures." 7:30 p.m., the midnight plan. As the office emptied, Claire stayed. She spread her notebook across the glass table, page after page of dates, clauses, and loopholes. Barry lingered, tie loosened. "You really think you can rebuild this overnight?" "No," Claire said simply. "But I can stop the bleeding. And I'll stitch it shut by force if I have to." Barry studied her. For the first time in 20 years of law, he believed someone outside legal might actually save the bank. 9 p.m., the rogue email. Her inbox pinged. An anonymous email. Subject: "They'll never let you win." The body contained only one line. "Mark is meeting investors tomorrow at 10. He's pitching them a new story without you." Claire closed the laptop slowly. Not fear. Not surprise. Just the calm certainty of someone who had already prepared for betrayal. She opened her folder and slid out a single page labeled, Board Resolution, Emergency Authority, Donovan C. Her weapon wasn't rumor. It was ink. 11:30 p.m., the quiet before midnight. The building was nearly empty. Claire sat alone under the hum of fluorescent lights, her reflection faint in the glass walls. In her notebook, one line stood out, written in bold ink. Power isn't granted. It's signed. At 11:57, she signed 3 interim agreements with vendors, time-stamped, notarized digitally, and backed by her board authority. At 12:01 a.m., AWS compliance confirmed. Enterprise access maintained. Epilogue of Part 10. The crisis hadn't ended. But Claire had shifted the tide. By midnight, Ricken Bank wasn't safe. But it wasn't dead. And every executive knew why. The woman they once fired to save a line on a cost chart had just kept the bank alive with a pen, a phone, and a notebook. The battle ahead would be uglier. Mark sabotage, investor fury, a fractured board. But for now, the storm had met its match. The sun hadn't even burned the fog off the city when Claire arrived. At 7 a.m., the glass tower was still half asleep, security guards nursing coffee, cleaners wheeling bins. But on the 10th floor, the boardroom lights were already blazing. They were waiting for her. Not for congratulations. For a reckoning. 7:15 a.m., the cold welcome. Barry met her at the door, jaw tight. They're circling, he muttered. Good, Claire replied, slipping past him without breaking stride. Inside, the boardroom was packed. Every director, every VP, even a few department heads who had no right to be there but wanted a front row seat to the show. At the far end sat Sheila Alvarez, audit chair, stone-faced on speakerphone from New York. Beside her, the board chair, Richard Hale, fingers steepled like a man pretending to pray. In the corner, Mark Greer, back from the grave, smirking like a wolf who'd found fresh meat. 7:30 a.m., the accusation. The chair wasted no time. Claire Donovan, he began, while we acknowledge your interventions yesterday prevented further collapse, concerns have been raised. Concerns. The word was poison disguised as politeness. Mark leaned forward, voice dripping with false humility. Claire's tactics with vendors may have stabilized short-term gaps, but they also introduced significant liabilities. Midnight extensions? Backdated indemnities? That's reckless. Investors are nervous. Murmurs of agreement rippled. Claire didn't flinch. Investors should be nervous about negligence, about leadership that ignored risk until collapse was hours away. She let her gaze linger on Mark, not about the woman who kept the lights on. The room buzzed. Half-shocked, she said it aloud. 8 a.m., the evidence. Mark stood, theatrically pacing. She's weaponized crisis for personal gain, demanding authority outside her scope, cutting deals without oversight, undermining governance. This is insubordination, plain and simple. Claire opened her notebook.
Calm.
Deliberate. She slid a folder across the table. Inside, the signed board resolution granting her authority, time-stamped, sealed. You all signed this, she said quietly. Midnight wasn't rebellion. It was execution of authority you gave me. Barry backed her. She's right. Legal authority is valid. Every vendor agreement holds. The board chair's expression tightened. Mark's smirk faltered. 8:30 a.m., the twist. But Mark wasn't finished. He reached into his bag and dropped a packet on the table. Investors called me this morning. They're preparing an emergency session. They want assurance that governance is intact. And they don't see that in Claire. They see chaos.
He spun the packet around.
At the top, draft proposal, interim crisis steering committee. Translation, strip Claire's authority, hand it to a committee controlled by Mark's allies. The room stirred. This wasn't theater. This was coup 2.0. 9 a.m., the counterstrike. Claire didn't raise her voice.
She didn't need to.
She stood slowly, walked to the screen, and connected her laptop. A document appeared. Vendor acknowledgements, September 14th. Signatures. Dozens of them.
Pollock.
Helix. AWS. Every major partner confirming her authority, her agreements, her name in ink. While Mark drafted coups, she said, I drafted contracts. These signatures aren't politics. They're operational lifelines. They recognize me. Not him. Not this board.
Me.
The room went silent. Even Sheila's voice on speaker faltered. Are those verified? Barry nodded. Stamped and logged. They hold. 9:30 a.m., the breaking point. The chair rubbed his temples. Claire, your authority is valid. But Mark is right. Investors want stability. She leaned forward, eyes locked on him. Then show them stability. Show them a board that honors its own signatures. Show them a bank that doesn't erase the woman who saved it because her truth is inconvenient. Mark scoffed. You think they care about your heroics? They care about money. Claire smiled faintly. Then they'll love me. Because, without me, every penny's already gone. 10 a.m., the vote. The tension broke into procedure. Hale called for a closed vote. Retain Claire's emergency authority or replace it with Mark's steering committee. Hands rose. One by one. Barry's first. Firm, loyal. Sheila's voice crackled through the speaker. Yes. 2 more directors followed. Wary, but convinced. Then came the fence-sitters. Hands trembling, eyes darting between Claire's calm stare and Mark's glare. Finally, Hale raised his own. The motion to retain authority passes. Claire remains acting chief risk officer. Mark's face drained of color. His coup had died in its crib. 10:30 a.m., the fallout. The meeting adjourned in murmurs. Some directors avoided Claire's eyes. Others nodded, quietly respectful. Mark stormed out, packet crumpled in his fist. He passed Claire in the doorway, hissed under his breath. This isn't over. She met his glare with steady calm. It never is. 11 a.m., the reckoning. Barry caught up to her in the hall. You just won the boardroom. But Mark's not wrong. Investors will want blood. Claire exhaled, long and steady. Then we don't give them blood. We give them proof. She tapped her notebook. Next step, the audit. We show them everything Mark buried. Every ignored clause. Every risk he papered over. They think I'm chaos?
Fine.
I'll show them the real chaos and who caused it. Barry stared at her like she'd grown sharper in real time. You're going to turn the audit into a weapon. She gave a thin smile.
No.
Into a mirror. Let them see what they've been feeding. Epilogue of Part 11. By noon, Claire wasn't just a survivor. She was a reckoner. She had stared down the board, shredded Mark's ambush, and walked out with her authority intact. But she knew power was temporary. The real battle loomed. The investor audit, the ultimate test of who controlled the narrative. As she left the glass tower, sunlight broke through the fog. Not warmth. Not victory. Just clarity. And clarity, Claire had learned, was the sharpest weapon of all. The investors didn't wait. By the following morning, Claire was sitting in a cavernous hotel ballroom converted into an audit chamber. Rows of tables lined with laptops, external counsel scribbling notes, and a dozen men and women in tailored suits staring at her like she was the variable in an equation they hadn't solved. At the far end sat Sheila Alvarez, calm but razor-edged. Barry was beside Claire, flipping nervously through binders. And, directly across from her, Mark Greer, already whispering into an investor's ear. This was the final battlefield. The audit begins. The lead auditor, a gray-haired man with eyes like steel, spoke first. We're here to confirm attribution, governance compliance, and the validity of recent agreements executed under emergency authority. Ms. Donovan, you've claimed operational control. We need proof. Claire didn't flinch. She opened her notebook, slid a flash drive across the table. On this drive, time-stamped vendor acknowledgments, signed indemnity riders, board resolutions, and system logs. All verifiable. All binding. A junior analyst plugged it in. Screens flickered to life. One by one, Claire's documents appeared, signatures, seals, digital receipts. Every page sang the same truth. Her name. Mark's counter. Mark seized the moment. These documents might be real, but the process was reckless. Midnight deals? Grace periods? You're exposing the bank to new risks. Investors can't trust chaos. Claire leaned forward, voice low but steady. Chaos didn't suspend your healthcare coverage. Chaos didn't freeze vendor payments. Negligence did. Yours. Gasps whispered through the room. Mark's smirk faltered. The turning point. An auditor cleared his throat. Ms. Donovan, one concern remains. What guarantees do we have that these controls won't collapse again? Claire paused, then opened her notebook to a single handwritten page. Because I rebuilt them myself, she said. Manual sign-offs. Single-point accountability. Vendor clauses rewritten to require my signature on every renewal. No autopilot. No shortcuts. That's the guarantee. Sheila's voice carried across the room. She turned a liability into leverage. Without her, you'd have nothing to fund. The silence that followed was thick with realization. The verdict. After 2 hours of combing through evidence, the lead auditor finally closed his binder. Findings. Ms. Donovan's authority is valid. Her agreements stand. Without them, the bank would have breached contracts worth millions. Our recommendation. Retain her authority until stability is restored. Mark shot up. This is insane. You're handing the company to a risk officer. The auditor didn't look at him. We're handing it to the only person who stopped you from sinking it. Mark's face went pale. The resolution. The investors filed out with their decision. Funding would continue, contingent on Claire's leadership. Barry leaned back, exhaling. You did it.
Claire shook her head. No, they did it to themselves.
I just wrote it down. She gathered her papers, slipped the notebook back into her bag. On the final page, one sentence stood bold in ink. Power isn't inherited. It's proven. Epilogue. By week's end, Mark was gone, quietly resigned, with a severance package that looked more like exile than reward. Claire's office moved 2 floors up. Her new title gleamed on the door. Chief Risk Officer. Employees walked past with cautious respect, some even nodding. She never smiled in victory. She didn't need to, because every renewal, every contract, every clause now carried one name that couldn't be erased. Claire Donovan. And the company would never forget it again. The boardroom emptied. Papers still lay scattered like shrapnel after battle, but the war was over. Claire stood alone by the window, city lights stretching endlessly into the night. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. Victory wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, undeniable. They had called her a cost center. Disposable. Invisible. But when the walls cracked and the clock ticked down, she was the only one holding the structure together. Her revenge wasn't in speeches or headlines. It was in ink on paper, her name etched into contracts they could never erase. Tomorrow the company would spin the story, polish the press release, pretend the storm had never happened. But inside every office, every Slack thread, every whispered hallway conversation, one truth would remain. When everyone else played power games, she played for survival. And she won. She closed her notebook, turned off the light, and walked out. Not as the woman they underestimated, but as the one they could never ignore again.